So do you guys want to just like fire us with questions, or you guys want to kind of talk amongst yourselves? What would you like to do? Just fire questions? I got a fire question. Now we want to talk among themselves. Talk among themselves. So we're 1-1. We've got to break the tie.
I like the firing.
Firing questions. We are 2-1. Any more?
Fire.
Any more?
Fire.
Fire. All right, we're going to fire questions.
You left it hanging there.
Right? All right. So now, if you're going to fire questions, you better have some. So, questions.
For pre-marriage, what are some topics you find people tend to graze over that you think that they should go more in depth with before getting married?
It's a good question. And so one of the things that a therapist does really well is they don't answer a question. They answer a question with a question. So the question was, for premarital couples, what are some of the things that might be glossed over, or what are some of the things that might not have been directed towards that that might need to have a little bit better explanation behind them moving forward? What do you guys think?
I think kind of like meta communication, so just talking about how you communicate, because I think that's, a lot of arguments start from just like misunderstandings. So, just sitting down and talking about like generally like what you mean by when you say certain things, or like, how you like to resolve conflict too, because that's something that can that I don't think gets talked about enough, that can kind of help all things easier.
Yeah. So Jim had the privilege of speaking on communications and stuff like that. So in light of what Andrew said, what comes up for you?
I think expectations is a really good thing to talk about. One of the things that I think you'll find is there's, because you both come from different households, I think I talked about that. There are some things that may seem obvious to you because you saw it with your parents, you saw it with your parents' friends, but it might be completely different in your fiance's experience. And because it was so obvious to you, you don't even think of bringing it up. And then, suddenly you're married and, why aren't you doing this? And it becomes a point of resentment because they're not. But they didn't know that they should, and because they never saw that model. So I think expectations is a big one. And trying to be open about, or complete, right? Because, like I said, you may not even think to bring it up because it seems so obvious.
I think we talked about this too, and this is a biological fact. You can argue with me if you want to, but talk to the doctors. Women and men's brain are different. They develop different in the womb. There are certain things like the corpus callosum, which is the bridge between the two brains, that are different sizes between men and women. So we think differently. There's no question about that. Right now, some of the guys are saying, you have no idea, and some of the women are going, oh yeah, absolutely. And so what we have to do, and this is what I think what Jim was talking about when Anna spoke towards, is we have to learn. I know my communication style. We have to learn my partner's communication style, right? It's akin to losing. It's akin to learning a different language, right? And I know what I can do is I can sit there and go, well, my wife needs to learn my language. No, she needs to understand me, right? No, you're not understanding me. No, that's not the point. Remember, we talked about relationship as other, right? It's not about me. And I think I shared this with you too, that, and I'm being completely honest with you, for about 20 years of my marriage, I was married for the wrong reasons. And I was married for me. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have a family. I wanted it. And the more I go down this road, both in learning about God's word isn't there, but I don't know, I pictured a Bible like that, so I apologize. But the more I learn about God's Word, and the more I go down this journey as a marriage and family therapist, the more I realize it's not about me, right? And if we go back to that Ephesians 5 passage, right, it's clearly not about me. Because if I'm to love my wife as Christ loved the church, what kind of love is that? Sacrificial. Right? So it's not about me. It's about my wife. Again, we talked about how Christ came down from the right hand of God. What was he gaining? He was losing his position. He knew that his father was going to turn his back on him. He knew that he was going to get the garbage beat out of him. Right? How many would you guys sign up for that job description? Right? So again, keep that in mind, especially you husbands, keep that in mind. That is my position. My position is to love my wife as Christ loved the church. That is a sacrificial love. It is not about me, it is about her. Other questions? Well, there's more things that we can talk about. One thing that somebody brought up when we were talking about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that was up after the class. It's a hyphenated word. I believe it's a hyphenated word.
At least the way you wrote it.
Well, yeah, which maybe not be, but in-laws, relatives, right? And that's kind of like what Jim was saying, right? Is we come from different families and we do things differently, right? And sometimes the parental unit, whether it is yours or your spouse's, can really impact the marriage, right? What are some passages of Scripture that you can think, and if it's a gross paraphrase, I'm okay with that. It doesn't have to be word for word. But what are some passages of Scripture that can help put you in the right position with regard to your spouse and your parents?
Passage where you leave your parents' house to leave your wife.
Right, it's in Genesis. I think it's Genesis 2. Leave and cleave. Right. That and it's interesting. I don't know why, but it's interesting because that statement was made to Adam and Eve. Find the irony in that? Adam and Eve didn't have parents. They were created by God, but he even knew then that could be an issue. What are some other things in newly or pre-married couples that can be brought up and maybe given a little bit more focus?
Sounds like a plug for our premarital counseling.
Prepare
You
for
see,
a roller coaster?
Who is responsible for organizing the premarital counseling in our church?
So Krista and I oversee the premarital counseling, and you guys know that? Okay. So there's a book that we use. And it's a pretty comprehensive way of answering that question. And the thing I like about it is it covers a lot of ground and it asks a lot of questions. Many of them you'll say, we've already talked about that. But it's the ones that you don't talk about. And it talks about the roles and responsibilities. It talks about how you plan to manage your finances. There's a chapter on communication. What is God's purpose in marriage and His plan for marriage? So it's really good. It gives lots of opportunity to walk through a bunch of aspects of marriage and ask those questions. And get you guys to think. It's not a yes, or it's not read this chapter and here's some questions to make sure you understand the chapter. It's read this chapter and understand these concepts, and then the question is, for you guys, you know, how do you guys want your marriage to be? And you're paired up with a couple that has been married for a while, and they can kind of help you noodle through that and figure out and wrestle together on what you want to have for your marriage.
So we're actually doing the premarital with Randy and Cindy. Is there anything that you wish that there was an additional chapter on, or just more information on in that book? Or?
Actually, I can add to this. Sorry. Sex. I think talking about expectations of sex is really
It's in there.
beautiful. We haven't read that chapter yet, obviously.
Right.
All right.
Last chapter. It's the last chapter, and we intentionally kind of push that to closer to when you're actually getting married.
Understandably so.
Yeah. So it does a good job, and I've asked the couples that we've counseled later, is there anything that we should have talked about that you didn't find? And they said, no, but there were some sections that we did have to go back and refresh our memory on. But, you know, it's not perfect. But the whole point is to have that dialogue and have you guys talking, and then you're paired up with a couple who is, you know, learning about you guys and your relationship, and they're going to ask some questions too about things that they see, hey, you know, it seems like they're not quite aligned in this aspect.
I think the greatest thing that book does, and this is something that Jim spoke about earlier, is helps bring out assumptions and expectations, and it gets them talked about. Assumptions and expectations will ruin relationships. Assumptions and expectations
An unspoken assumption,
Right.
or expectation, yeah.
will ruin relationships, right? And so, well, how do we get out of assumptions and expectations?
Well, I can tell you the fact that they do cause a lot of wounds and a lot of scars,
Do
being married for 21 years. And the thing that I
Of
learned.
bliss. I'm not seeing the facial expressions next to you there.
The thing that I learned, I don't know if this is going to answer your direct question, but the thing that I have learned is that an assumption is not dealing with a fact. It's dealing with a feeling. And until you have the actual chain of events or whatever is involved in that assumption, until you have truth, then you're not dealing with what you are trying to deal with or what you think you're dealing with. You're just
Yeah.
dealing with a feeling.
Yep.
So you need to be dealing with truth.
And how do you find truth?
Communication.
Communication. And how do you communicate?
Ask questions.
Ask questions. Remember we talked about this before you're married? Man, you were like like almost like a machine gun with questions. Bam, 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 bam. I want to know, man, I want to know everything about this woman. I want to know, right? And you almost have to kind of pull back because you're annoying, right? But then somehow when we get married, we stop. We stop asking questions, right? And we get into an assumption. And it's based off of something. And then there's a thing that we do too, is when we don't have the truth, I don't know why, but human beings are set on the negative more than on the positive. So there's a thing that we call catastrophizing. And so I will take this little something and I will grow it and I will grow it into this, whatever, into this. And it's based off of something that's not even true. But that's where my mind goes, right? And so to ask those questions, to remember that when I am feeling tension in the relationship, what do? Just pretend it doesn't exist and go on. Yes?
Acknowledge the tension.
Have to, because it's going to come out. One of the things that I have struggled with in my life is anger and rage, right? And you can ask my wife. I brought that into the marriage, and I used that in the marriage, and it was brutal. What I have to do now is I can't allow it to get to that point, so I have to go in there and I have to ask those questions, and I have to do that, and I have to identify, hey, you know, I'm upset about this, right? Because if I hold that in, you know, how many of you guys know what a pressure relief valve is on a water heater? Okay, how many guys watch Mythbusters? Okay, how many saw the one in Mythbusters where they took a water heater that did not have the pressure relief valve and let it, right? What did it do, Steve?
It's like a rocket.
It blew a hole through a 2-story building, through the first floor, through the second floor, and then traveled over 150 feet in the air,
Oh my gosh.
right? So that pressure relief valve removes the pressure. We all need to have a pressure relief valve because it's going to come out. One way or the other, it's going to come out. Whether it's this big or this big, depends on how we use the pressure relief valve and what that pressure relief valve is. So that can be a good conversation too. What are the things that I struggle with? Where do I feel that pressure? What do I do with that pressure? How do I relieve that? Stephen, you raised your hand a little while ago.
Yeah, a couple things that Lauren and I discussed shortly after we got married that we just never thought about talking about before was one is like politics and just like what are your priorities in the world and how do you see the world, and then the other one is what is generosity, just like what does generous mean to me and what does that mean to Laura, you know, and obviously that's something that would come out in your budget and finances, but that is something that we, you know, that didn't come up in the book, but, you know, it came up pretty quick.
It's a good point. I mean, it kind of comes out of the budget, but it comes out as a number.
Yeah.
That doesn't explain why
Yeah, it's not
you set
a
the
line.
number
Yeah.
at what you set it at. And if you're saying in the budget, you'd have a line item there about your political position because your contribution to
I mean, that might be. That's why you
Just wondering where you're
got
going with
And we know now more than ever the divisiveness that politics can play. It's right, and it doesn't mean that just because you have a certain set of beliefs that your spouse has the same set of beliefs, right? And I attended a church sermon. It was a different church, and I thought it was well. This was when there was a lot of tumult within the political system, and he said, "I can go and I can support the liberal agenda from the Bible, and I can go and I can support the conservative agenda from the Bible." Right? Okay. So what do? We focus on Christ. Right? And that is a conversation that you can have. Again, what my hope for you in your marriage is, remember what we talked about from Ecclesiastes? How many strands? And who's the third strand? God, right? I hope that when you're in your marriage that you have God goggles on, right? And that everything that I see is through those goggles. Because if I'm looking through his lenses, I'm not looking through my agenda, right? If I'm looking through his lenses, there's no place for my agenda. So yeah, so those are good. Those are good comments, and that was probably the one about generosity. Was probably a bigger issue with Susan and I. Susan is very financially sound, responsible, understands what is appropriate in giving. I give away the farm, right? And so, again, God has put us together, and I think because of her position in that, it has made me stronger. Because if I give everything away, I have nothing else to give, right? And so we also, one thing, and I don't know if we talked about this last time we were talking about finances. I think we did. But the one thing that I would make sure that you do talk about in your marriage is how much and what are you going to give and how are you going to give to God. That has got, in my opinion, that has got to be a key tenet of your relationship. How are we going to support God financially? And I know that sounds weird because it's his money anyway, and he doesn't need our support. But what are we going to give to him? How are we going to give to him? Right? And how How do we come together then? And I would encourage you also, as life goes on and things change and maybe salaries change too, is to revisit that. Just as you revisit a budget, to revisit what and how much. And again, there's a difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. What is the percentage that we have to give in the New Testament? Trick question. There is no percentage. You give according to what you feel and according to your first fruits, right? So might that be, the widow's mite? Sure, if that's all that you can give. But might it be a lot more than we're giving? Sure. And again, one of the things that I think that is important, and I think it's biblically based, but I don't think it specifies. But when we give, I want to give and make it hurt a little bit. So there's a little bit of a sacrifice there. Why? Because Christ's death and resurrection, He sacrificed for us. That's a simple little way that we can sacrifice. And let me tell you that this is not a prosperity gospel in any way, shape, or form. But if you give that way, He will bless your socks off. It may not be financially, but you can never outgive God. You can never outgive God in your relationship. It ain't gonna happen. Other questions? Yes?
Can we go back to the catastrophizing?
Yes.
If you have, if one spouse does that often, what are good ways to recognize that and deal with it as the other spouse? Because it's, whoever's catastrophizing obviously comes from fear, but it's not anything the other spouse can really help or control. It has to come from that person within.
Right.
How do you maneuver that?
So, do you understand what she's talking about? So what do you guys think?
When the other person is catastrophizing?
Yeah, so we're having a conversation or something like that, and I've heard something from my wife, and I just take it and I run with it, and now I've blown this whole big thing up out over here, and it's just not true, and she could be sitting there telling me, Brent, that's just not true, and so forth and so on, yet I'm still this big. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that helps us is either he will say it or I'll say it, and I'll say, this is what I hear you saying, and sometimes it kind of diffuses, or maybe that other person's layers that they created all on their own, and then you're trying to repeat it back to them. They suddenly go, oh, what did I just all over?
Because I'm an ogre. I have layers.
It probably actually, full transparency, that applies to me. I'm the one who does that, what's that word called?
Catastrophizing.
Catastrophizing. I mean, I don't do it, like, I think I've grown from that, but I could relate to it. Anyways, I think just getting that, what in that huge explosion is relevant.
Ooh. Yeah, that's good. You guys are going to be irritated with me, and that's okay. The best way to not get into an argument is not to get into it. Duh! Right? Okay, so how do we do that? We are built to respond to threat, whether real or perceived. Right? When we respond to threat, there's a number of different things that happen. Number one is our body will become tense and get into a position of the 3 Fs. What are the 3 Fs? It's fight, flight, or freeze. And why is that? That's to protect me from whatever the perceived threat is. Now, that perceived threat can be real or it can be imaginary, right? But if it's a perceived threat, I'm going. I know that the brain is not this simple, but there's the instinctive brain and then there's cognitive brain. When the information comes in, it goes into the instinctive brain in the limbic system, and in there's this little, I call it a switch, it's not really a switch, but it's the amygdala, right? And the amygdala processes through that and figures out, is this a positive thought or is it something that is negative? If it's positive, it throws it up into the prefrontal cortex where we actually have a cognitive thought around that and we can process that. If not, our body immediately switches, right? And the first thing that happens is our body prepares, the physical body prepares for fight, flight, or freeze. And when I'm talking about this is milliseconds, okay? So it prepares, and then as it's preparing, it refocuses the blood flow in our body, right? And where does it take a lot of the blood flow from? From the brain, right? Because if somebody is coming after me and creating threat, I don't want to think about, oh my gosh, look, here's Austin, he's got a knife. What am I going to do? You want to respond. Right? So your body is setting that all up. So it takes your prefrontal cortex off. So when you are in that kind of situation, when the catastrophizing is starting to grow, they are, don't say this to them, this would be good. They are not in their right mind. They literally are not thinking correctly. Okay?
Let me know how that goes.
Yeah, you're not in your right mind now, don't. Because something's coming, I'm telling you, right? Okay, so that's great. We found out this is what happens. How do we get out of it? Well, the first thing is, if you have a partner that has a tendency to be a little bit more reactive, try not to go there. Right, remember the 2 greatest questions? Did I get the 2 greatest questions in there? If I didn't, I failed.
All right, write it down.
Okay, so you're having a conversation and everything is going pretty good. And then something that you say, you can feel something switch, right? That's that tension that I'm talking about. And what you want to do at that point, not before, so you want to catch the catastrophizing when it's here, not out here, is you want to say, hey, what just happened? I noticed that there's something different in the relationship. Right? Did I say something to offend? Did I do something wrong? It just, something's off, right? Okay, that doesn't mean that they're going to go down the same path with you. But hopefully, that will get them to stop and think. If you can get them to stop and think, then what you've done is you've created a cognitive thought and you've brought the prefrontal cortex back online. Okay? Listen to me, that doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes they want to go down a road, or sometimes the threat is bigger than we might think. But the biggest thing within your relationship, with discussions and conversations, is I want you to start understanding and identifying that tension when things switch. I'll bet if I asked every one of you right now, you could think of an argument or a disagreement that you had with your spouse or fiance or even someone. It can happen with brothers and sisters or whomever. And it's like, what just happened? We were having this good little conversation and now we're going down a street that we don't want to go down. Right? That's that switch. So whatever was said, it was deemed as a perceived threat. Okay? So if you can talk them off the ledge, so to speak, and go, hey, what's going on? Right? And the second greatest question is, what do you need from me? Right? I think I've shared with you guys that I'm an incredibly fast learner. And so in my marriage, it took about 25 years to figure out that it's far better for me to ask what my wife needs than to sit there and to assume what she needs. And I can remember, sure as day, we were sitting on the couch in our family room, and Susan was telling me something, and I went in for the fix. I was going to tell her what she needs to do and how she needs to do it. And I stopped. Probably the first time in my life, I stopped. And I asked her, I said, hey, what do you need from me? Right? And what did she do? She told me. Right? And that's an incredibly freeing thing. And it doesn't just have to be husband to wife. It can be either way. Okay, so identify that tension. When it switches, try to catch it before it gets huge. Because if it gets huge, what do you have to do? You have to get out of the way. Right? I have this analogy. There's this like plateau here, then there's a hill, and then there's another plateau here, and there's this ball, and this ball is our relationship, right? And when that ball gets right on the precipice of that hill, all it takes is a breath, and that thing's rolling down the hill. And once it's rolling down the hill, what can you do?
Run.
Yeah, get out of the way, because you're gonna get hurt, right? You're gonna get squashed. You're not gonna stop that ball. So the thing that we wanna do, and this is also, even before, most disagreements don't happen at that point. Most disagreements happen 2 or 3 days before. But it just builds up to that point, and finally the straw that broke the camel's back, right? So we don't want that ball to remain right at that spot there, because if it's going, I'm gonna get squashed. And the best thing I can do at that particular point is take a step back. And what do we call that step back? It's a term that they use in sports. A timeout. A timeout, right? Hey, you know what? This is not a good place for me, and it's not a good place for you. Why don't we take a step back, and why don't we come back in an hour or two? Okay. How many of you guys are familiar with sports? Okay. How many games do you know that end on a timeout? I know of none. Okay. So what does that mean?
That was a trick question.
That means that I have to come back. I have to finish the game. Because if I don't, what have I done? Yeah, I quit. I've abandoned. Right? So now here's my spouse going wicky wacky woo woo, crazy, not in their right mind, angry, catastrophizing. Right? And I abandon them. Ouch. Right? It's easy to be with your spouse when things are great and fantastic. But when things are difficult and hard, there's a reason why it's difficult and hard for that person. But I don't want you to put yourself in harm's way either. And taking that step back, remember when we talked about love and respect, and we talked about that sometimes one of the best things you can do in respecting someone is to take a step back from that, because if you don't, you're going to put them into a position that they wouldn't want to be in, that could hurt people and hurt things, that once they get out of their freaking crazy mind and get back into their real brain, they'll sit there and they'll have guilt and shame about that. Right? That make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a dance, right? The greatest thing, and not just because this is a Christ-centered approach, the greatest thing is that you can pray. Right? Pray, right? Pray for healing, right? And not just when things are difficult. Right?
Can I give an analogy, Mike?
Yes, please.
So, 21 years, well, no, it's not an analogy, you're right. 17 of them have been running the business. And I recognize that, as you were explaining, that catastrophizing comes from things of the past, things that have been, trauma or feast and famine in the industry, and so what I've recognized is when that will try to start to happen, it's what's God's truth? What's God's truth right now? Because my brain will start to go in 17 years of up and down, and then the lies are that it's all Mark's fault. It's all Mark's fault. It's all everything that failed is on him. But then when I get grounded and rooted and I ask God, give me your truth, He reminds me, of our industry and the things that He has shown me over the years to be true. And then that catastrophizing gets calmed down. But it is a slippery slope. And it's caused from what you said. It's caused from things.
Right.
It's not just a pattern. It's usually caused from other things that cause that way of, handling something.
There are very few couples that I know that want their spouse or significant other, that they want to be angry at them, that they want to dislike them, that they don't want to be with them, that they can't think that they think that they're the worst thing on the face of this planet. Do couples get to that point? They do. But initially, that's not where they're at. So you have to sit there and think, okay, wait a minute. Why is this guy going down this track? Why is this woman going down this track? We bring baggage. We bring stuff. And we may forgive, but we don't forget. And sometimes we shouldn't forget. Right? And so we need to understand that when we look at our spouse and they're going off the rails, there's a reason why they're going off the rails. They don't want to be that way. People don't want to be unhappy. People don't want to be grumpy. People don't want to be angry, right? Or at least very few people that I know do. So remember that when you feel that tension, and that's the other thing that's so frustrating, is I can watch my spouse, but I can't change them. I can pray, I can love, I can respect, I can honor, but I can't change them. Right? And that's where it's really important for women in the relationship to have other women that they can talk to, not about their spouse. I would hope that you would never say a negative word to anybody about your spouse, ever. You can sit there and say, I'm struggling in my marriage and all that kind of stuff, but oh, you should know my husband, well, you should know my wife, whatever. No. Don't do that, right? Because it's not about them, it's about me. You can certainly sit there and say, hey, my, and I feel comfortable enough sharing this, that my husband's really struggling now. I'm talking about me. He's really struggling with depression. Right? That's okay. But don't say anything to besmirch the character, because that's hard to recover from. Right? And so that's where you have to make sure your relationship is buttoned up with God, because it's going to be a tough road to hoe. But I'm convinced if you have gotten married before God in mind, that God has put you together for a purpose. Do the best. Take responsibility for what you're responsible for, and do the best that you can. Right? And the best that you can is really to surrender to God and say, hey, I got nothing. Help me. I want to love my husband, and I don't know how. I want to respect my husband, and I don't know how. Stephen, you had a question, but before that question, I would like to introduce somebody else who is passionate about marriage as well, and that's Dr. Gary Stafford. He's one of the elders here, and and so you can direct questions to any one of the three of us. So.
One of the things I was just going to add to what you said is like the thing, so Theo and I have been married for 21 years, and we both
Seems to be
come.
like a pattern here.
What?
Yeah, I'm thinking like 4 years ago.
But we both came from like broken homes, and like in my family, like you just walk away when so I'm like the only one who's been married this long and still standing strong. And I think that like what's really helped is just like, first of all, like growing in my own faith, and just being like realizing that no matter what he's saying to me or what's going on in our lives, that ultimately I stand in front of God and I have to take everything to him, and that makes it more about I don't correct things for my husband per se, but it's like I want to do the right thing for the Lord. And then also like for us, I think reaching out and being willing to ask for help, If we can't, if one of us is catastrophizing things and we both have been there, it's like sometimes you just need that extra person to come in and help you, and then you can get back on the right track. And that's been like, I think just like helpful, because then nobody wants to run away. You're reminded that like you're there for a purpose.
Well, that's a humbling experience, right?
Yeah.
To sit there and say, whoop, can't do this on my own, but let me tell you, you're not meant to do this. You were meant to be in a relationship, right? Relationship with marriage, yes, but also men with men and women with women, right? Again, Dr. Stafford and Jim, they are good friends that I can rely on and that I can go to them, and when I'm struggling, I can talk to them, right? That is a relationship that I was not aware that I needed for a long time. And then when I found it, I was like, what a knucklehead you were, because you didn't exercise that earlier. Stephen?
It wasn't a question, it was going back to the threat, perceiving a threat. And just speaking from the guy's point of view, when I'm in that moment of perceiving a threat, we've found as a principle, and it's really helpful to me, is like having this agreement that in that moment where you're perceiving a threat, trusting that you're still on the same team, and trusting in the best of that person instead of the worst. And then when we do have disagreements and one of us is, if I'm presenting myself as an enemy to Laura, she can say, hey, we had this agreement that we were gonna assume the best in each other, not the worst. And so, and just that simple, as you were saying, you don't think much when you're already on that threat perceived situation. So it has to be this simple, love always trusts. So trust that I'm not your enemy. As much as it seems like it, I'm gonna act as if you're not, and that's something that's been really helpful to us, is just assuming the best in somebody instead of the worst, and keeping each other accountable for that, and pointing it out, like, hey, we're getting to a point where one of us is not assuming the best in the other, and that's been really helpful to us. As far as that, once that threat moment comes, that principle has been helpful to me specifically, and for our relationship, and for our marriage, just to snap us out of that cycle. It's a perceived threat; it's not real.
Now there can be real threats.
Yeah.
Right. But one of the things that I'll do with my couples every now and again is I'll say, so I want you to look at your spouse. Okay? And they'll turn and look at each other. I want you to look each other in the eye. And I want you to know that what you're looking at is not the enemy. What comes between you is the enemy. And so what we have to do is we have to work on taking whatever it is that's getting between us and remove that. This is not meant to be to scare, but it's meant to inform. Okay? Satan wants to destroy your marriage. He wants to destroy your relationship. He wants to point a finger at it and go, look, those Christian folk are just like everybody else. Jesus Christ doesn't mean one hill of beans to a marriage. Right? So understand that as a Christian couple, that you're going to be under a greater threat than people who aren't. And understand that those threats, you guys can be all buttoned up, your relationship can be wonderful, and stuff can come in from the outside, and you're like, where did that come from? How did that get here? So just to be mindful, we do not have to be afraid at all, because Christ has won the battle, but we have to be aware, right? And what we don't want to do is we don't want to open the door. We don't want to just even crack the door, right? Because if Satan can get his foot in there, he's going to try to weasel his way in there. Some of the ways that we can open the door is through looking at inappropriate behavior, or inappropriate images. Some of the ways that we can open the door is by living in resentment, right? I would encourage you today, if any one of you are experiencing resentment one towards the other, speak it out, right? And And preferably not like, I resent you. But hey, listen, I'm struggling because this is what I'm experiencing. And what's coming up to me is I find myself resenting. Because what happens when you resent is that the person starts resenting and then they'll resent and resent and resent and resent, and they find themselves out here and we're like, holy buckets, how do we get out here? Man, I look across the table and I see this beautiful woman that I thought I used to know. What happened? How did we get out here? So the other thing too is the minute that you think you got it, you don't. And the minute that you understand that you don't have it, you do. Because that's a position of humility and surrender. Yes?
In regards to the fight, flight, or freeze, when Jim and I are in discussion that I feel is a conflict, I tend to freeze, and one of the things that he does that I find very helpful is when he notices it, he says to me, I'm not mad at you. And that just totally brings me down to a place where I can relax and then discuss whatever we can talk about.
How do you notice that? How do you notice to be able to even respond that way?
Well, I can, so there's some, I think I shared during our time together, the history of what Krista experienced growing up of, it's not, wasn't the norm that she saw where her parents would talk through things. And so I'm sensitive to it, but I can also see that she's, the look on her face, right, that she is feeling threatened. And so I guess earlier we talked about, understanding your spouse and when is it that you see a change? It's going to be different for every one of us in here as to what those signals are, and you need to learn what those are with your spouse and recognize what the signals are. And so you can say something and recognize what's happening, and then now bring that out and talk about it, which is what Brett was talking about.
And that recognizing, I don't know about you guys, but I find that is fun. Man, there's nothing that I enjoy more than getting to know my wife better.
I thought you were saying that it was fun to see that look of fear on your face.
That too. No, actually,
I'm not sure Susan would see it that way.
no, and that is, I've seen that look of fear on Susan's face. And it's been caused by me. I don't ever want to see it. And so you have to know yourself. Right? I cannot hold things inside. I can't. I will break and I will take it out on the people that I love and I have. Yeah. But how fun it is to get to know your spouse.
I mean, that's part of marriage, right?
Yeah.
It's a lifelong study of your spouse, of getting to know them, and they, right, we all change over time. So it's a never-ending process.
I think I describe it as like, and bear with me, I'm a little bit of a nerd. I described it like the staircases as Hogwarts. They're constantly changing. You're going to the same location all the time, but they're constantly changing, and you have to know that, right? You can never become complacent in marriage. You can't. It is a journey that you pick up every day, and hopefully it's a good one, right? It's not going to be perfect. I know you guys might think that with Susan married to me, it would be perfect, but that's just not true. It's hard. It's hard work. But man, is it rewarding. You really get to see the example of Christ. Because I will tell you right now that I have never experienced what unconditional love is more than through my wife. Just haven't. Yes.
I have a question about the timeout. So I feel like a lot of times it's easy to get a conflict, oh, I'm gonna put things on timeout, especially if someone's going through something emotionally, depression, that kind of thing. How do you approach coming back to the timeout? Because I feel like a lot of times, we put things on timeout because of an emotional state, and then what if they're still in a poor emotional state? How do we address that? Because I feel like the person who's kind of leading to talk about things, you start to get more catastrophic. And it feels like you put a little pebble in front of the rock, but there's another rock approaching. So how would you say address that?
Yeah, you've asked way too many questions, so we're gonna move on. No, just kidding, just kidding. That's a great question. So the person who calls the timeout is the one responsible for bringing it back. Okay. So if I sit there and I tell my wife, hey, can you talk about this tomorrow morning over a cup of coffee? And I go in there and I still feel that tension. I still need to meet her for a cup of coffee and tell her, hey, you know what? I'm just not ready to talk about this yet, or, so, but, and if it goes for a period of time, okay, right? But what you want to do, because when you're in the fight, flight, or freeze, right? I really want to tell you guys something, but it's too much of a construction worker's idea of looking at something, so I can't. Okay, so I'm going to do it. I shouldn't do it, but I'm going to do it.
I want to hear it now.
So, I try to make things so that they make an impression to people, right? So, when you're in fight, flight, or freeze, you're effed up. Fight, flight, or freeze. See, now you guys will remember that all the time because you think about what I'm thinking, but it's not what I'm thinking. Anyway, squirrel, ADHD, wonderful, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So the timeout. So when you're in that fight, flight, or freeze, okay, again, you're not going to have a conversation. It takes roughly, once the cause is removed, if there's nothing that will done, it'll take roughly 72 hours for our body to reset and to kind of come down to where we can actually have a conversation. If it takes a full 72 hours for you to have a conversation, then so be it, right? If you have to come back and then come back again and come back again, until you can get down to where you're both in your correct mind, okay, right? And I know right now some people are saying, well, Brent, how does that work with, don't let the sun go down on your anger, okay? Well, I think that you have to look at that statement, right? So, look, I cannot go to bed until we resolve this thing, but my husband is so mad, my wife is so mad that, but I'm just gonna power through. That is not gonna go well, okay? Any type of disagreement or conversation or something, I think we talked about this just briefly, but no deep conversation should happen after 9 o'clock at night. 9 o'clock is an arbitrary number, but the idea is that no, we do not want to throw this thing at the end of the day, because why? What's that?
Tired and ready to go to bed.
Yeah, I'm gassed. I got nothing. I'm done, right? And we may not want to do it early in the morning. Why? Because not everybody's a morning person. So we want to come at it with our best, right? So stay with it. Stay with it. Remember, I am convinced of this. Your spouse does not want to feel the way that they're feeling. They don't. They don't know how to work through it, right? And so they're staying in this, and staying in the fight, flight, or freeze. With that being said, I have experienced in my profession some couples, and it's tragic, that are constantly under fight, flight, or freeze. They are constantly under stress. And they are exhausted. They are physically, emotionally, spiritually exhausted. And they don't know what to do. Right? And I think that's what you're saying when we need help. That's when we need help. Because we can't get through this. Yes?
Can I add on to that?
Yes, please.
Great question. I don't know how many of you are, I am a thinker. I need to stew on something before I'm ready to respond. Anybody else like that? Okay, my wife is not that way. She can address it right away. But if I address something right away, most of the time I will say something foolish or stupid or mean, and probably all three. Something that will not be helpful to anybody at any time. So we'll postpone it. But one of the important things for us has been to set a time that we will pick it back up. If it was up to me, I would never pick it back up. I would just let it ride. That's not good. But if your spouse is one of those that it's not best to ask them to respond, because their response won't be good or helpful. Can I say one last thing, because I gotta go, and I
Yeah.
apologize. Thank you for letting me be part of this. You probably heard it from Jim and Brent and Randy already, but on behalf of the elders, we are for your marriage. We are for your marriage. Never ever are we for Stephen and against Laura, or for Laura and against Stephen. We are for that Greenaway marriage. And we need to be for it. Why? Because Satan is against it. He wants to destroy it. So we would love it if we don't have to know all your dirt. We don't not need to know everything. But we want you to feel safe coming to the elders. We want to come alongside you, help you. We're not here to solve your marriage problems, but we're here to walk alongside you in those valleys and on those mountaintops. We need each other. So please get to know the 8 of us, and we are honored to walk alongside. We and our Savior are for your marriage.
Thanks, Gary. Another thing that I would add on to that, if you choose to come to the elders and you want to bring guilt and shame to that, you're more than welcome to. You're not going to get it from us. We will speak love to you. We will speak truth to you. If you feel guilt and shame because of what we're talking about, okay. But we're not going to, we're not going to shame you or guilt you into something that we don't think that's not what we're doing. Ultimately, our desire, and if there are struggles, or even if there aren't struggles, I mean, how cool would it be for some couple to sit there and say, we would just love to come and talk to the elders and just introduce us. Okay, what's wrong? Nothing. Really? Yeah. That's awesome. I love that when a couple comes into therapy and they're just like, we just wanted to kind of get like an oil change, just kind of get a tune-up. Okay, so what's wrong? How's communication? Pretty good. Disagreements? Yeah, we have them, but we get through them. Really? Right? I mean, it is a joy. It is a joy for all of us to see happy marriages. Man, I'm a little weird, and I understand that. That is the greatest joy that I have in my job. That is one of the things that I love as being an elder, is to see wonderful marriages and see marriages get repaired and marriages grow, right? That's why I love what Jim and Krista do with others in the premarital counseling, because we're setting it off right. And there's a connection between those, and as that couple grows, and it's exciting, right? I would love for every marriage to not have a single issue as they move forward, right? I know they do. But the ultimate thing is, how do we get through those things? Answer your question? Yeah, hard, really hard. It can be very isolating and lonely. Other questions?
I just want to add that the older I get and having 5 kids and dealing with
6.
he keeps me young. I just want to share that and the fact that things are getting very difficult to do in life, work, maintain relationships. Just so much stuff. The importance of you starting with Jesus is the absolute thing that I think I'm just seeing the most important. I understand the elders are here, but we need Jesus. We need him first. And that is a place that spills over. It spills over when we're doing that first, you know. He speaks truth to us, he heals us, he hears us, he forgives us, he loves on us, and I think that that's what we need more and more. And as you said, you both said, the growing part of being married for so many years is new. It's constantly changing. It's constantly, when you start having children, you start having a whole nother game in your marriage that is sometimes fun to play, and sometimes you're scratching your head wondering how you're gonna get through this.
Times
you know.
6, 5.
So I don't know, for whatever that's worth, for newer, younger, older, wherever you're at, it's Jesus. It's really spending quality time with him and letting that intimate relationship with him pour into you.
Who's responsible for the spiritual well-being of the marriage?
Well, he's supposed to be the spiritual
Hello?
leader.
The husband.
God is in charge.
Yeah, but I mean, who's, right? The guys don't want to say anything because it's going to put them on notice.
Especially if you have kids, what do you do if your husband isn't stepping up as a spiritual leader in your home?
Pray for him. And I said something when we were talking about this before, and I didn't speak as correctly as I would like to. Men, do not give that position up in your family. Don't do it. Women don't take that position either. However, if your husband is not going to be responsible for that, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go to church. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't get the kids ready for Sunday school. However, if your husband finally has the courage to step back into that role, don't put up the big stop sign. And I got this. You've been flaking out for this much time. I'm going to keep going. Don't do that. Encourage him. Encourage him. It has once been said that little girls grow into ladies, little boys grow up into bigger boys, right? And by that I mean, as men, we need and we encourage support. In John Eldredge's book, Wild at Heart, he talks about that when a man knows that his woman is behind him, he functions like Superman. There's not a lot I can't do, right? And so the reason why I bring that up is, yes, take responsibility for that role if your husband is not going to step in there. But if he starts moving towards that, don't squeeze him out. Invite him in, and hopefully he will grow into the position where he takes that. And for where you are in your marriage, if you're newly married, don't give that position up. If you're not married, don't give that position up. If you've been married for 21 years and you haven't taken on that responsibility, take on that responsibility. Right? Why? Because God said so. It's God's plan. I grew up in a family that I was a Christian family, but it wasn't God's plan. And my mom took that position and she ran with that position and she never surrendered it to my father, ever. And even if he attempted to do certain things, he would pull back because it was never, now that was just as much his fault as it was hers. But God's plan is perfect. God's plan for marriage is perfect. I don't care what other people say. God's plan for marriage is perfect. Do we perfectly follow it? I would love to say that I do, but I don't. Do I want to? Yes, that is a desire from my heart. And kind of getting back to this, I see a lot of couples, and some of them are believers, and some of them are not. I do not know. I have no idea how people without Christ can make a marriage work. My wife and I got married as Christians, and we've had struggles, and I don't know how in the heck we could be where we are right now if it wasn't for Christ. Because I know that I certainly would have destroyed it. She's far better than I am, but
Can you talk a little bit about what it means to be the spiritual head? Because I think there can be a misunderstanding of people of what that means. Like, is it somebody like I get to come in and tell everybody how they're not following the Bible, or what does that mean?
that is absolutely correct, just like Christ did, right? Christ went in and he just beat everybody up with the Bible. Right? No, who did he beat up with the Bible? He beat up with the Bible. He beat the people up with the Bible that people, well, actually it wasn't the Bible, but you understand what I'm saying. That people that thought, the arrogant ones, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he called them out, right? Go to the woman at the well. Gosh, what a tender exchange. What a tender exchange. He could have ripped her a new one. He could have called her out. He could have said all this bunch of junk about her. But he didn't, right? And so, again, looking at it through those eyes of sacrificial love, right? Because ultimately, what's the purpose? I, as the leader of the family, want my family to follow Christ. If I'm a jerk, right, and we all know that there are people that wield the Bible that are jerks, and they use it as a weapon, right? Then what am I doing? I am alienating people from God's word. I am sitting there and providing an example of what is not supposed to be done. Ouch. Don't do that, because you will be called on the carpet by Christ. Right? When we go to heaven, we will be responsible for what we have done in his name. Right? So there's a humility. There's a humility there, right? There's a care, there's a tenderness there, right? Christ is out and all this kind of stuff, and the little kids want to come to him, and the disciples said, yeah. And what did Jesus say? Let the little children come to me, right? That kind of inviting, right? And if your spouse, men, if your spouse is resistant, what do you do? What's that?
Love them.
Love them. And what's one of the best ways that you can love them? Pray for them. Right? Not to sit there and to bring up all their failings. Well, you know, if you don't do this, blah, 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 blah. Right? And that's what he said. No, but to pray for them. God, look, remember the open bottom pyramid? What is my responsibility to my wife? It is to God. It is to God. Does God need me to provide anything for my wife? He does not. Does he choose to use me? Yes, he does. So that's where I have to focus. I have to focus on my position with God. And our job is to love our wives as Christ loved the church. That is not out of a position of being a bully. That is not out of being a position of knowing more. Right? Who know more about God's scripture than Christ? Nobody that I know. And yet, he used it gently, and he brought people to him rather than push people away from him. The people that he pushed away from him, again, were the arrogant folk that thought they had it all together, right? So men, humble yourself. Let God help you fulfill that position. Women, if they're not filling that position, that doesn't mean that you sit there and say nothing. You can approach them and say, you know, I need more, I want more, right? I would love for you to, you know, Susan has said this a number of different times and I failed. Why don't we pray more? Pray with me. I want you to pray with me. Right? And I usually kind of start out good and then I am the vine, you know. Right? So it's not about being perfect, but it's about where the heart is. Right? And the term, and I think I shared this too, the term husband comes from husbandry, which is a term that's related to farming, which is to care and to raise. That's what our job is, to care and to raise our rabbis. Other question? I think I shared with you before, I'm okay with awkward silence. Because that's what therapists do, they just sit there and be quiet until somebody says something. But I also want to respect your time. So if there are more questions, that's fine, but as you're thinking of them, if there are any, thank you. Thank you for the honor it is to walk alongside of this. These are big shoes to fill. And we do not, I am in the same boat that you guys are in. We are flawed human beings saved by grace. And it's only through the strength and power of Jesus Christ that we can even take any kind of credit for the relationships that we have with our lives. With that being said, there is, when you leave, please take one of the surveys, because we want to know how we can make things better, other topics that we can talk about, perhaps other classes that we have on marriage. We would love to have a marriage 101, 201, 301, 401, 501, 401k. No, sorry. Well, I wouldn't mind the 401k, that'd be okay. But we would love to continue to grow this, because there are so many different things. There's a whole set of things with newly marrieds. There's a whole set of things with parents. There's a whole set of things with, adolescents. There's a whole set of things with emerging adults. There's a whole set of things with, retirement and stuff like that. And we would like to provide that type of opportunity for all of you. So let us know how we can help. So yeah, so grab the survey over there, and then in a box just below there are some books. I believe that those are little devotionals and stuff like that. Please feel free to take those for you and your spouse. And if you're single or what have you, please take one of them as well. You don't have to just go there. Yes, Susan?
Don't forget to announce the groups that they're forming.
Oh, yeah. Connie was supposed to be here and do that and remind me, because I failed. Connie had asked me to talk about that last week, and I failed. So, one of the things, too, that this class has been great. And I think that you guys, well, I'll speak for me, you guys have been great. And I love the interaction, and I love the fact that you guys have stuck through it, through all 6 weeks. But we don't want that to end. And so, I don't know if, I believe it is Connie that is coordinating that. But what we would love to do is, from this class, is to develop opportunities, and I think the thing that they're talking about is going through the book Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs, which, if you return your survey, we ordered, I think it's 20 of the books, so if you return the survey, we would love to give that to you. So talk with Connie Johnson. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to be structured per se, but talk with Connie, and hopefully we can get some other groups and go through it. The simple principle, dynamic book, hard to do. Yes?
If I could, are any of the groups gonna be with the video series?
I don't know.
I would just like to put in that request.
Okay.
I know that the book was hard to do for us, and it was like, read one chapter, and then did you read it, did you not, but the series, the video series, he's really funny. So it was fun to do together and to watch together. It's like a whole new Netflix series, you know? I mean, to do that, it's like, I mean, it was just more beneficial for us.
And they do have there's a weekend conference they put on periodically. How long, that was, what, 2.5 years ago? We went to it, and it's very well done.
Yeah, he's great.
And that's probably what the video series is
Yeah.
Snippets of the different sections of the retreat.
Yeah, it's well done.
Yeah. And I mean, what a great thing to stream, right? To binge watch. And you watch it over and over and over. Yeah. I'll talk to Connie, I'm not sure. Yes, sir?
When and where do we return the survey?
You can turn it to me as early as next Sunday, or whatever. Yeah, I think that's good. I gotta find out. So, I think I shared this at the beginning, but I'll share it again now. There's so many things that are love and respect, right? So, we ordered the books. We ordered the wrong ones.
You ordered a book.
Is that
We
your
ordered
fault?
a book that says love and respect on it, yes, but it wasn't the book that we intended. So, that's why we intended to have him here today, so we're not trying to, tease you with the survey, but.
So you failed again.
But that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Take just a half a moment and look around you. These are your compatriots in this. You're not alone. There are other people that are as passionate about marriage as you are. Utilize them. As believers, like I said, we're meant to be in relationship. Right? My hope is that perhaps one of the individuals here, one of the couples here, is that you could connect with in a deeper way, and that it would be a lifelong journey. When Susan and I were just starting here over 25 years ago, we met, I think it was three different families. We started a small group that was not based off of, but they came kind of out of MOPS because Susan had been meeting there, and those relationships, three of the four of those, or three couples out of the four, those relationships have lasted lifetimes. And we grew our families up through those relationships, and we've all gone through struggles in our marriages. And I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done it without them. And so my prayer for you is that you find those connections, wherever it is, whether you've been married 21 years or I was just talking with the Conleys, which I don't know if you know them or not, but they're been married 43 years, or whether you are just looking, right, or just have started in a relationship, or you're engaged, or whatever, but that you make those connections and you know that you're not alone. Anything else, Jim?
Yeah, several people asked if I had a handout, so I did put a handout together of some of the stuff that I covered in the communication segment, so maybe I should put that back there. And I brought some more limes. Lime trees still overflowing, so help yourself.
Any other last questions?
Is the survey in person? Was that last week? Is it online?
It's just, so I'm so high tech,
Okay.
you'll get, right? It's a piece of paper that's over there that you can write on. Yes, I admit it, okay? I am technologically challenged. I could have done a Survey Monkey and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't. So, oh well. Thank you for asking, I appreciate that. All right, thank you again. It has been a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
May this just be the